The small town of Millstone hadn't seen a wedding this joyful in years. Nestled between rolling hills and winding rivers, the town had always been quiet, its charm tucked away from the chaos of the outside world. But on the sunny afternoon of June 22, 1985, the air was filled with laughter, the scent of lilacs, and the sound of distant church bells. Lisa Monroe and David Harper were finally tying the knot, and nearly the whole town had shown up to witness the moment. Lisa looked radiant in her flowing ivory gown, simple, elegant, with lace sleeves and a trail of tiny pearls running down the back. Her brown hair was swept up with loose curls framing her face, and her eyes sparkled with a mixture of joy and nervous excitement. David, tall and confident, wore a navy blue suit instead of traditional black, his tie matching the pastel pink roses that adorned the church. His smile never left his face, not even for a second, as he held Lisa's hand at the altar, vowing to love her, until the stars fell from the sky. The ceremony was held in Millstone's historic stone chapel, surrounded by lavender fields and towering oak trees. The couple had spent a year planning every detail, handwritten vows, a string quartet, and vintage lanterns hanging from the trees outside for the evening reception. The guests were mostly locals, farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, but every seat was filled, and every face was beaming. It felt like a fairy tale. After the vows, the couple shared their first dance in a clearing under the twilight sky. Fireflies blinked lazily around them, and the reception echoed with clinking glasses, cheerful toasts, and the soft strum of guitars. When it was time to leave, guests formed a tunnel of sparklers. Lisa and David ran through it, laughing, their hands raised in the air, before disappearing into the night in David's beloved vintage Mustang, trailing white ribbons and a sign that read, "Just married." It should have been the happiest day of their lives. No one knew it would also be the last day anyone ever saw them. The following morning, Lisa's mother, Eleanor Monroe, sat by the kitchen window sipping her coffee, waiting for the phone to ring. Lisa had promised to call as soon as they reached the cabin, just a short call to say they'd arrived safely, maybe describe the view, the little fireplace, or what they planned to cook for dinner that night. But the morning passed without a word. Eleanor brushed it off at first. Maybe they were still driving. Maybe the cabin had poor phone service. Newlyweds were often eager to unplug from the world, after all. By evening, however, Eleanor's nerves began to fray. She tried calling Lisa's number, no answer. She tried David's parents, hoping they had heard something. They hadn't. The next morning, still with no word, Eleanor drove to the local sheriff's office and filed a missing persons report. It might have seemed dramatic after just 24 hours, but something in her gut screamed that this wasn't just a delay or forgotten call. She knew her daughter, and this silence was unnatural. Lisa always kept in touch, always. Deputies began a simple check. They contacted the cabin rental company in the hills outside of town. Yes, Lisa and David had a reservation. No, they hadn't checked in. The keys remained unclaimed. A patrol car was dispatched to survey the area and check nearby roads, but nothing appeared out of place. No tire tracks. No damaged trees or roadside debris. It was as if the couple had never made it beyond the wedding. More calls were made. Friends were questioned. Nearby hospitals were contacted, and law enforcement checked the highway for accident reports or road incidents. Nothing. David's credit cards had not been used since the evening of the wedding. There were no phone records. After 9:38 p.m., when Lisa had called her mom to say, "We're just getting on the road now," Eleanor's worry turned into full-blown panic. She began calling radio stations and local news outlets, pleading for any information. She posted flyers around town with their wedding photo, Lisa beaming in her dress, David standing beside her with his arm around her waist. The picture was taken just before they left the reception, full of light and laughter. No one could understand how a couple could vanish within hours of being surrounded by so many people. The town that had just celebrated their love was now holding its breath, gripped by a fear that no one dared say out loud. Something had gone terribly wrong. As days turned into weeks, the joyful celebration of Lisa and David's wedding was replaced by an atmosphere of unease and quiet dread. Flyers with their faces fluttered on telephone poles and church doors, sun-faded copies of what used to be a perfect day. The investigation, which had started with urgency, began to slow as each new lead led nowhere. Authorities scoured the stretch of road the couple was believed to have taken from the chapel to the cabin, tracing every possible route. Drones weren't common in 1985, and helicopter searches were costly and limited, so search teams focused on what they could reach by foot and vehicle. But the thick woods, deep ravines, and vast farmland made the area a patchwork of mystery. The Mustang, bright red and distinctive, should have been easy to spot, but it had simply disappeared. The rumors started not long after. In a town as small and close-knit as Millstone, mystery breeds whispers. Some believed the couple had staged their disappearance and run away to start a new life. Perhaps they had cold feet, or a hidden plan, and the wedding was all an act. But those who knew Lisa and David scoffed at the idea. They were deeply in love, grounded, and had already made plans for a home near Lisa's sister, Claire. Others spoke in hushed tones about darker possibilities. Maybe they had been abducted, highway bandits, carjackers, or something more sinister. One hunter claimed he saw headlights deep in the woods that night, long after midnight, but when asked for specifics, he couldn't recall the exact location. A retired trucker passing through town told the sheriff he'd seen a car swerving near the Old Canyon Road, but no one could verify it. A psychic from the neighboring town offered help, insisting she saw water and screaming in her visions. That lead, too, went nowhere. Even more fantastical rumors began to circulate. Some said the land beyond Millstone was cursed, that couples who entered those woods sometimes never returned. Local teenagers, emboldened by the mystery, began daring each other to visit the old forest road at night. Lisa and David's case had taken on the sheen of urban legend. In the official investigation, the file grew thicker with every passing week, full of witness statements, search reports, and photos, but not a single piece of real evidence surfaced. The Mustang had not been sold, towed, or driven through any toll booth. Their bank accounts remained untouched, and their IDs never turned up. The absence of clues made the case even more chilling. There was no sign of life, but also no sign of struggle or death. Just nothing. As summer faded into fall, the search efforts dwindled. Without new leads, the authorities labeled it a cold case. But in homes across Millstone, the disappearance of Lisa and David was all anyone could talk about, over coffee, at church gatherings, or whispered on front porches. People locked their doors earlier. Parents warned their children not to go into the woods. And Claire Monroe, Lisa's younger sister, began a quiet obsession with the case that would consume the next 12 years of her life. Claire Monroe was only 18 when her sister Lisa disappeared. She had been Lisa's maid of honor, still wearing traces of lavender nail polish from the wedding that haunted her dreams for years afterward. The image of her sister laughing in her wedding dress, twirling beneath the fairy lights strung across the trees, never left her. That night had been perfect. And then, suddenly, nothing. In the beginning, Claire struggled with the loss like everyone else, vacillating between hope and grief, denial and acceptance. But as months turned to years, and the town moved on, Claire couldn't. She had been close to Lisa in a way that only sisters understand. Lisa had practically raised her after their father passed away. She had been Claire's best friend, her anchor. Claire refused to believe that someone so full of life could just vanish without leaving a trace. Her gut told her there was more to the story, something everyone else had missed. Claire enrolled in a local community college and studied criminal justice, then transferred to a university out of state. While others her age were figuring out their lives, Claire's world revolved around maps, cold case files, and forensic science articles. Her dorm room wall was filled with pinned notes, timelines, and printed photographs of Lisa and David. She contacted retired detectives from the case, combed through every old report, and collected newspaper clippings like a ritual. It wasn't obsession, not to her. It was purpose. She didn't want justice. She wanted truth, closure, anything. By 1997, Claire was in her early 30s, working a quiet job as a library archivist back in Millstone, and still chasing leads in her spare time. That's when she stumbled on a news article that would change everything. It was a short feature in a science magazine, talking about how satellites were being used to detect ancient ruins buried beneath dense jungle using infrared imaging. The idea sparked something. What if a satellite could detect something here, something hidden beneath the trees or brush that ground searches had missed? Claire began researching archived satellite images. It wasn't easy, access was expensive, and image quality from the mid-1990s was still limited. But she used her academic connections and wrote letters to university labs and government offices, hoping someone would listen. Eventually, she gained access to a small collection of high-resolution satellite images from the area surrounding Millstone, captured over several years for environmental studies. She didn't expect much. But one night, poring over the latest batch of images alone in her apartment, she spotted something, an oddly shaped glint in the corner of a 1996 scan, just at the edge of a dense, mostly unexplored patch of forest. She enlarged the image. The outline was faint but distinct, rectangular, metallic, partially buried under a canopy of trees. It didn't match the topography of the terrain, and it wasn't on any survey maps. Something was there, something that didn't belong. Claire's heart raced. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in years, hope. Real hope. Could it be the Mustang? Could it really have been sitting there, hidden for over a decade? The next morning, she printed the image and drove straight to the sheriff's office. It had been 12 years since Lisa and David had vanished. But Claire was finally holding a clue, something that had evaded police, dogs, helicopters, and search teams. A clue not from this earth, but from far above it. Claire stood at the sheriff's office counter, gripping the printed satellite image like it was sacred. Her voice trembled with urgency as she explained what she had found, pointing to the glimmer of metal caught in the photo. At first, the deputy on duty glanced at the image with polite skepticism. But Claire wouldn't let it go. She laid out her years of research, the dead ends, the comparison maps. She showed how the shape hadn't changed over time, proof it wasn't natural. Eventually, the sheriff himself, Sheriff Alden, came out to speak with her. He had worked the original case back in 1985 and still carried the weight of its failure. Something in Claire's eyes, the sheer conviction, the quiet desperation, compelled him to take another look. Within 48 hours, a small team was assembled. They used topographical overlays and GPS coordinates to identify the suspected location, a patch of rugged forest land about 50 miles from Millstone, thick with trees, rocks, and steep ravines. It wasn't part of the original search radius. Back then, the area was dismissed due to rough terrain and the belief that the couple would have stayed on the main road. No one had considered they might have taken an unfamiliar turn, or that a moment's distraction could have led them astray. On a damp morning in late September 1997, Claire joined the search party as they hiked through dense underbrush and uneven terrain. Every step deeper into the forest made her heart beat harder. Birds chirped lazily overhead, unaware of the weight the silence carried. After nearly 4 hours of cutting through thickets and following handheld GPS coordinates, a volunteer called out. "Something's here." Hidden beneath a canopy of moss-covered branches, in the hollow of a narrow ravine, was the rusted frame of a car, its body partially crushed by time and the shifting earth. The red paint was faded, nearly erased by years of rain, snow, and fallen leaves. But the shape was unmistakable. Claire stumbled forward, breath catching in her throat. It was the Mustang, David's car. The search team grew quiet. Sheriff Alden approached the vehicle slowly, his boots crunching twigs. No one spoke as they circled it. The car had come to rest nose first into the ravine's slope, partially buried by soil and forest debris. One of the back wheels was missing. The windshield was cracked inward, and vines had grown through the open driver's side window. Inside, time had stopped. There were skeletal remains in the front seats. A delicate bone where Lisa's hand would have rested, still adorned with her engagement ring. A weathered leather wallet was tucked beneath the steering column. It bore David's initials, barely legible, but still there. The scene was haunting, peaceful, tragic. The couple had died together in the car they left their wedding in. It was the kind of discovery that hit in waves. Relief, shock, grief. Claire knelt beside the Mustang, tears falling freely. She had imagined so many possibilities over the years, some too dark to speak aloud, but never this. Never something so quiet, so accidental, yet so final. The sheriff ordered the area secured. Forensics teams would come in to confirm identities and reconstruct the crash. But no one doubted who was in that car. After 12 long years, Lisa and David had been found, not by luck, but by a sister who had never stopped searching. A cold trail made visible from space, finally leading home. The discovery of the Mustang made headlines across the state. News crews swarmed the small town of Millstone, broadcasting images of the rusted vehicle being lifted out of the ravine by crane, its frame fragile and overgrown with moss. But beneath the public interest and media frenzy was the quiet, intimate heartbreak of a truth that had taken 12 years to surface. Forensic teams moved in quickly. The bodies were respectfully recovered and sent for analysis, though everyone already knew the truth. Dental records confirmed the remains as Lisa Monroe and David Harper. The cause of death, as determined by the county coroner, was blunt force trauma from the crash, instantaneous for David, likely fatal for Lisa within moments. It was a tragic accident, not a crime, but the details raised questions that refused to settle. Investigators tried to reconstruct what had happened that night. The road they had taken, as it turned out, had once been used as a scenic bypass before being closed off due to erosion and lack of maintenance. The "road closed" sign meant to warn drivers had long since been knocked over, possibly by a storm or vandalism, and no barriers remained. It was likely that David, in the haze of newlywed joy and late-night exhaustion, had followed the wrong fork in the road without realizing it. The path twisted and narrowed, eventually becoming little more than a dirt trail. Just a few miles in, one sharp turn bordered a steep ravine, with no guardrails. A single misjudged curve, a blown-out tire, perhaps, or a momentary distraction as he looked at Lisa, laughing beside him in her wedding dress. Whatever happened, the Mustang veered off the edge, rolling down into the gulch and vanishing from sight, completely hidden by the dense foliage. It was a tragic, perfect storm of poor visibility, worn roads, and bad timing. And because the area was considered impassable, search parties had never looked there. Yet some unsettling questions lingered. As authorities examined the vehicle more closely, they noted damage that didn't quite match a standard crash pattern. The passenger side headlight was shattered inward, but the left side of the car had deep, strange scrapes, almost like it had been sideswiped. The car's rearview mirror was missing entirely, and David's door had markings that suggested something more than a roll into the ravine. An autopsy couldn't confirm anything more than trauma consistent with a crash, but it was enough to stir uncertainty. Had they really just taken a wrong turn? Or had another vehicle followed them, run them off the road, and left them to be forgotten? There were no surveillance cameras in 1985, no phone GPS logs. All that was left were theories, suspicions, and a battered vehicle buried by nature. Officially, the case was ruled an accident, and law enforcement considered it closed. But locals talked. Some recalled seeing a dark truck speeding through the backroads that night. Others mentioned an unfamiliar car parked near the chapel just before Lisa and David left. No one had written it down. No one had thought it mattered. Claire asked the same question again and again: why that road? David had grown up in Millstone. He knew those roads well. Lisa wasn't the type to venture blindly either. They had mapped out their honeymoon cabin route weeks in advance. The scenic road wasn't on it. In the end, the truth was likely somewhere between chance and circumstance. Maybe they'd tried to take a romantic detour. Maybe they'd been followed. Or maybe fate had simply dealt them the cruelest hand imaginable. What remained now were artifacts: a water-damaged wedding program found under the passenger seat, Lisa's compact mirror still in the glove box, and David's pocket watch, cracked but intact, reading 10:42 p.m., its hands frozen in time. A moment captured forever, buried for years beneath the forest's quiet cover. The chapel in Millstone had not hosted a large gathering in years, but on the crisp autumn morning of October 11, 1997, it filled once again, not with wedding guests this time, but with mourners, neighbors, and friends who had never forgotten the young couple whose love story ended too soon. The same wooden pews that had once held guests smiling through happy tears now supported shoulders hunched with grief and reflection. People clutched tissues and held hands, whispering memories, as candlelight flickered gently across the stained glass windows. Lisa Monroe and David Harper were finally laid to rest, together, side by side in Millstone's quiet hillside cemetery. Their names were etched into a single granite headstone that read simply, "Together in life, together in rest." For the townspeople who had followed their story from joyful beginning to tragic silence, the funeral brought a strange sense of closure. The mystery that had haunted Millstone for 12 long years had, at last, found an ending, if not all the answers. Claire stood by their grave, clutching a bouquet of white roses, the same kind Lisa had held on her wedding day. Her voice broke as she gave her eulogy. She spoke not only as a sister, but as a witness to the depth of their love and the heartbreak of their disappearance. She told the gathered crowd about the final satellite image, the clues buried beneath years of dust and forest, and how a single glint of light had guided her to them. She didn't speak about the doubts, the questions that still lingered, or the strange damage on the car. This day wasn't about that. It was about honoring Lisa and David as they were, two people who had loved deeply and were lost far too soon. After the service, the townspeople gathered under the same oak tree where the couple had once shared their first dance. Some brought photos from the wedding, blurry but heartfelt images of Lisa laughing, David dipping her low in a dance move he hadn't quite mastered. Others shared stories. An older man remembered how David had helped fix his roof as a teenager. A woman recalled how Lisa had once brought her homemade soup when her husband was sick. These weren't just a couple who had vanished, they had been part of the town's fabric, stitched into its very soul. Over the following weeks, the area near the ravine where the Mustang was found was cordoned off and eventually marked with a small plaque. It read, "In memory of Lisa and David, whose love was lost to time but never forgotten." Claire visited often, leaving fresh flowers and sitting quietly with a notebook, still writing. She had begun drafting a memoir, not just about the mystery, but about holding onto faith when the world seemed determined to bury the truth. And in many ways, Lisa and David's story lived on. Millstone changed. The tragedy inspired improvements in local search procedures and awareness about road safety. High school students studying forensic science began citing the case. A local artist painted a mural near the town center, showing Lisa and David holding hands beneath a sky full of stars. It was a tribute not to how they died, but how they loved, and how deeply they were missed. For Claire, peace didn't come all at once. But she found a quiet strength in knowing that her sister had never been truly lost, only hidden, waiting to be found. Lisa and David had begun their forever together, and though fate stole their future, love had brought them home. And far above, from the same sky that revealed their resting place, the stars watched silently, as if holding witness to a love story paused in time but never erased.